In the last 10 years, ketamine-related deaths have risen 20-fold. Not heroin, not fentanyl, but ketamine, a drug that hospitals use on children every single day. So, how does something legal, something medical, something that doctors trust with children's lives, end up killing people at 20 times the rate it did a decade ago? That is exactly what this video is going to answer. Most drugs you have heard of work in a pretty straightforward way. Cocaine floods your brain with dopamine and you feel powerful, confident, unstoppable. MDMA releases serotonin and you feel connected, warm, like everyone around you is your friend. Even psychedelics like psilocybin distort what you see and feel, but you are still there, still you, just in a very different version of reality. Ketamine does none of that. Unlike MDMA, which primarily affects serotonin and dopamine, ketamine works on an entirely different system, one that blocks NMDA receptors, which are tied to how your brain processes reality itself. It does not make the world feel better, and it does not make you feel more connected to people around you. It makes you feel disconnected from yourself, and that is exactly what makes it so dangerous. Ketamine was not invented in a back alley or a basement lab. It was created in 1962 by a chemist named Calvin Stevens, working at a pharmaceutical company in Detroit. The first human dose was administered in 1964, and the patients described feeling like they were floating in outer space with no feeling in their limbs. In 1970, the FDA approved it under the trade name Ketalar, and it quickly became the most widely used battlefield anesthetic in the Vietnam War. Soldiers even carried it on their person, which is why it became known as the buddy drug. But after the war, something shifted. By the early 1970s, recreational use had already begun on the west coast of the United States. Throughout the 1980s, ketamine spread across the country as a party drug, and new forms of it began appearing on the street market. In 1999, the United States made it a federally controlled substance in an attempt to stop its illicit use. But the story does not end there, because in the 2000s, researchers began discovering something unexpected. Ketamine could rapidly treat depression and suicidal thoughts in ways that no other drug could. A battlefield anesthetic, a party drug, and now one of the most researched psychiatric medicines in the world. To understand what ketamine actually does, you need to understand one thing about your brain. It is constantly sending signals, and those signals are what make you feel real. The main chemical responsible for this is called glutamate. It is the most abundant excitatory signal in your entire nervous system, and it travels through a specific gateway in your brain called the NMDA receptor. Ketamine blocks that gateway completely. When those NMDA receptors go offline, your brain loses its ability to process reality in the normal way. It can no longer track time, space, or even your own body position accurately. This is why people under ketamine do not hallucinate a new world. They simply lose access to this one. At low doses, this feels like a strange floating sensation, sounds become distant, your body feels weightless, and your sense of self begins to blur. At higher doses, something more extreme happens. It is called the K-hole, and it is a state of almost complete disconnection from your own body and surroundings. People describe watching themselves from the outside, unable to speak, unable to move, fully conscious but completely gone. Most people who try ketamine recreationally do not plan on using it again. It just happens once, then twice, then every weekend. And the reason it keeps happening comes down to one word: tolerance. The dose that made you feel weightless last month does nothing for you today, so you take more, and then more after that. And the cycle quietly begins. Repeated use starts altering your brain chemistry, particularly the glutamate system we talked about earlier, and over time your brain begins relying on ketamine just to feel normal. This is when recreational use stops being recreational. The K-hole that once felt like floating starts feeling like the only place you can escape to, and escaping becomes the whole point. And the terrifying part is that ketamine addiction is not physical like heroin or alcohol. There are no violent withdrawal symptoms, no shaking, no sweating. It is entirely psychological, which makes it much harder to recognize and much harder to stop. Long-term ketamine abuse causes damage that is quiet, slow, and in many cases permanent. The most well-known consequence is ketamine-associated cystitis, where the bladder becomes so damaged that some patients need full removal before the age of 30. Chronic use also shrinks gray matter in the frontal lobes, causing memory loss, difficulty planning, and impaired decision-making. And perhaps, most unsettling of all, most people do not notice any of this until the damage is already done. When the drug wears off, reality comes back, but it does not feel the same as it did before. The come down typically brings exhaustion, anxiety, depression, and a cognitive fog that can last anywhere from 24 to 72 hours. For casual users, this passes, but for chronic users, the line between the come down and everyday life begins to disappear. Depression, cravings, and emotional instability can persist for months after stopping, because the changes ketamine made to brain chemistry do not simply reverse overnight. Many people describe the aftermath not as withdrawal, but as a strange emotional flatness, like the world lost some of its color and never fully got it back. And for some, that flatness becomes the very reason they return to the drug, looking for the feeling they can no longer find anywhere else. Which drug should we cover next? Drop your vote in the comments down below, and if you found this video helpful, make sure you subscribe for more.